So thank you very much indeed, Professor Wang, for inviting me to do this talk. It's a great honour to be here in Beijing. So I've titled my talk Variation Learning and Being Human. I'll just start, before I start, I'd just like to show a little bit of context about where we are. I'm from the University of Nottingham. This is a picture of our campus. This is our campus in Nottingham. This is the main administration building. This is where the student building. These are where students have living areas. Some of these. This is a science area down here. So it's one of the very beautiful campuses in the UK. Nottingham is famous or proud of having produced 2 Nobel Prize winners, actually both in 2003. And possibly the one who's best known is Peter Mansfield. He won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2003. And I was just saying a few minutes ago that Peter Mansfield, he won the Nobel Prize for inventing magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. MRI scanners are now used around the world in almost every hospital, every big hospital in every country in the world uses MRI scanning. MRI scanning was actually invented in Nottingham by Sir Peter Mansfield. We have as well as our campus in the UK, we also have a campus in China, in Ningbo, where we have somewhere around 6,000 students. That's all I wanted to say on Nottingham. So I wanted to go on to, I wanted to start off by talking about how do we evaluate computer performance? How do we tell whether computers are doing a good job? And in order to answer this question, I'm going to just sort of lead you through some discussions. So, in certain areas, evaluating whether a computer is working well is quite easy in one sense. If you're building a chess computer, how do you test whether you've got a good working chess computer? Well, ultimately, you end up playing a game of chess against Garry Kasparov. And at the time, this was now 1997, very famous IBM Deep Blue. At that point in 1997, the IBM computer beat Garry Kasparov. So then you have a computer system which beats the world champion in chess. So your computer system is the best there is. We've just had a quick discussion. I'm just going to point out, although your computer system is the best there is when it's beat Garry Kasparov, it's still not perfect. It still might lose a game of chess. 20 years later, just a year ago, AlphaGo has beaten the best player in the world at Go. Go is actually a harder game than chess. It's taken the computers 20 years longer to get to the level of intelligence, shall we say, required to beat the best ever human player, or the best human player. And again, so now the computer is superhuman. It's better than the best human in the world. Again, it's still not perfect, but it's better than the best human in the world. So what about if we build a computer expert system? How do we tell whether a computer expert system is good enough to use? I think this is a difficult question, and this is a question which has we've been stuck at for some time. So to answer the question as to how we tell whether an expert system is good enough, I'm just going to lead you through some argument. So first of all, the Turing test. Obviously, hopefully you're aware of the Turing test. Alan Turing in 1950, just at the early creation of computers, and certainly before any artificially intelligent computers or intelligent computers. So the Turing test, the basic idea of the Turing test is that you have a screen where you can't see. You've got a computer and a human behind the screen. And then you have an observer or a questioner. And the observer or the questioner interacts with the computer or the human. And in the Turing test in 1950, he had the observer interacting by passing written words backwards and forwards, because he thought it would be too difficult to create a robot which looked like a human. He wasn't trying to create he wasn't talking about does it look human. He was talking about is it intelligent like a human. So he was envisaging that he would just pass questions backwards and forwards. And in the full Turing test, you're allowed to ask any question on anything whatsoever. And actually over any period of time, you don't have a specified time limit, you can keep asking questions. And at some point, the observer has to make a choice, has to say whether A is the computer and B the human, or the other way round, is A the computer or B the human. And in the full Turing test, to pass the Turing test, you have to not be able to guess which one is a human or which one is a computer with statistical significance, shall we say. You can't just guess once and get it right, or just have one test after half an hour and get the right answer, and that proves that you passed the Turing test. For the proper Turing test, it's supposed to be that the computer is, shall we say, statistically, it's indistinguishable from the human being. The Turing test has then been misused many, many times and misapplied, and people say they're passing the Turing test because they pick one specific area and they allow questions on one specific area, and then after a certain time limit, often they put a time limit on it, half an hour, and after half an hour they can't tell, they haven't already spotted which one is definitely the computer, then they say it's passed the Turing test. But that's not quite the Turing test. But the Turing test is sort of determining whether the computer can imitate a human being to sufficient to be indistinguishable from the human being. On average, you can't tell which one's a computer and which one's the human. So I'm going to pose this as a principle that the way we test whether expert systems are good enough to use is not that they have to get some 75% performance or 80% performance, 85, 90, or even 100% performance. We can't set any level of performance on an expert system. The test for whether an expert system is good enough to use is if the expert system is indistinguishable from human experts, okay, then it's good enough to use. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be as good as the best humans. Okay, a bit like Gary Kasparov and chess. If your chess computer can beat Gary Kasparov, that's a fantastic level of performance. It doesn't matter that it might make a mistake in some sense and lose a game. So we're not striving for perfection, we're striving for performance as good as a human expert. And I think it's important that we're talking about human expert. I mean, again, we've just had this discussion. I think the human expert is defined as good human performance, or high-level human performance. So I'm not advocating the test is testing it against poor human performance. It's got to be like the best humans, or the best humans in a specific area. But if your computer system is as good as the best humans in an area, then it's going to be good enough to use. So now I'm just going to talk about expert variation. I'm going to talk about expert variation by going back, some of you who have seen my other slides would have seen some of this, seen my other talk, seen some of these slides. I'm going to take you back to, this is when I was a PhD student, and we were doing this, I was I was given a task. And what was the task? The task was to identify how sick, how ill babies were in the first seconds of being born. Literally the first seconds of life. If a baby was ill, they wanted to know how ill it was. Now, just to give some explanation to this, I'm not going to go into a lot of detailed medical explanation, but the basic principles are that all of you now, me, all of you, we are breathing in oxygen, our cells are metabolizing oxygen, and we're breathing out carbon dioxide. That's what creates life, that's what life needs, metabolism. We breathe in through our lungs, the cells metabolize, they put the carbon dioxide back into the bloodstream, the blood goes back to the lungs, and the lungs breathe out carbon dioxide. In the baby, this gaseous exchange, it's called, taking in oxygen and metabolizing and giving out carbon dioxide, gaseous exchange takes place via the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord going into the baby's tummy. And what happens is the mother breathes in oxygen, the oxygenated blood flows through the mother, it crosses the placenta, and flows down the umbilical cord into the baby. The baby takes in oxygenated blood, the cells are metabolizing, they create carbon dioxide, the deoxygenated blood come out the umbilical cord, back into the mother's blood, and she breathes off the carbon dioxide. So that's the basic principle. What happens is during labour, in the process of giving birth to children, there is oxygen starvation occurs. The reason oxygen starvation occurs is because when the womb contracts to push the baby out, it contracts, it stops the blood supply to the umbilical cord. I'm not going to go into the details, but it stops the blood supply. So this is a bit like holding your breath. You know, you interrupt the blood supply, you interrupt the gaseous exchange, so it's a bit like holding your breath. At the beginning of labour, the contractions last 1 minute, and maybe there's a 5-minute gap. So it's just a bit like holding your breath for 1 minute, and then you breathe for 5 minutes. Well, that's okay, you think that's okay. By the end of labour, often the contractions are happening, they last for about 1 minute, and then relax for 1 minute. So this is a bit like breathing for 1 minute, holding your breath for 1 minute, then breathing for 1 minute. Then holding your breath for 1 minute and breathing for 1 minute. The trouble is, at the end of labour, if things go wrong in the end of labour, this last stage of labour might last 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. If you try holding your breath for a minute and breathing for a minute, and you try doing that for 4 hours, you can't do it. An adult can't do it. What happens is the oxygen levels are gradually going down in your blood, and the carbon dioxide will be building up. As oxygen levels go down, basically, you've got a problem. We've all got a problem. If we hold our breath, we've got a problem. But if we get starvation, oxygen starvation, we get asphyxiation. We die from asphyxiation. What happens is actually the body has reactive mechanisms. It concentrates the oxygen at the 2 vital organs, the heart and the brain. But eventually, the oxygen to the brain gets too low, the brain, you get brain damage, and then the brain stops pumping the heart stops, and then you have death. So what happens is as you're getting asphyxiated, lack of oxygen, you'll first get brain damage and then death. And so because childbirth has oxygen starvation as part of it, this can happen, brain damage and death of the children, of the infant. If everything goes okay, if the childbirth proceeds normally, then obviously the baby is healthy. Most babies are healthy. But actually, it's estimated that maybe 2 or 3, maybe up to 5 per 1,000 infants suffer brain damage or death as part of labour. That's actually incredibly high. 5 per 1,000 is incredibly high. If all of us had a chance of dying of 5 per 1,000 on any day, we wouldn't last very long. The childbirth is also dangerous for the mother. Maybe 5 per 100,000 mothers suffer some sort of big problem. But anyway, 5 per 1,000 babies may die or get brain damage. So I was working with a group of doctors and we wanted to know how close is this baby to dying from lack of oxygen, how close are they to suffering brain damage. So the way we do it, or the way they wanted to do it, there's no way of doing this, there was no existing way of doing this. You can't ask the baby how it's feeling or anything like this. So we need some way of telling whether the baby is sick. So the way we did it is take some blood out of this umbilical cord. What happens is the baby is born, so the baby emerges from the mother, and then what you do is put 2 clamps, one set on the baby's tummy, and then another set next to the mother, 2 clamps, and then they cut in between these clamps. They separate the baby, and if the baby is very ill, then they start giving it oxygen and they start giving treatment to the baby. The mother, they carry on with the rest of labour. She may have to still deliver the placenta. They can look after the mother, but they've separated the baby from the mother. They've got this little section of umbilical cord, maybe about this long, sometimes 5 to 10 centimetres long. Say about the size of a finger, something like this size. And in that umbilical cord, then, you've got the blood which was going into the baby and the blood coming out of the baby. So you have the oxygenated blood and the deoxygenated blood. And you can take, in a syringe, you stick a syringe in, you take this blood into syringes and you put them into what's called a blood gas machine. And basically the blood gas machine tells us, it's going to tell us the oxygen levels of the blood and the carbon dioxide levels of the blood. And basically, from that, we're going to tell how sick the baby is. Now, it doesn't matter the medical details. Actually, you don't measure the oxygen content directly or the carbon dioxide directly. You measure 2 other numbers. It really doesn't matter. One of them is the pH, the acidity of the blood. You measure the acidity. The acidity is related to the carbon dioxide content. Because carbon dioxide, CO2, reacts with water in the blood, H2O. CO2 plus H2O gives H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. So carbon dioxide in the blood is acidic. So the more carbon dioxide you have in your blood, the more acidic the blood is. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You take 2 numbers, which we think of these numbers as basically giving you information on the carbon dioxide and oxygen content. And what you need is you need them from the artery and the vein. You want the artery, the vein is the blood going into the baby, the artery is the blood coming out of the baby. So in the end you need 4 numbers, the pH and this base deficit number, and you need them from the artery and the vein. And then you look at these 4 numbers, and from these 4 numbers you can say how ill is the baby. And you think, well, that sounds easy. Well, actually, it turns out 4 numbers are difficult for humans to interpret. Humans can visualise 2 dimensions, so if we've got 2-dimensional data, humans can deal with it. 3-dimensional data, humans can just about cope with, because we can somehow visualise 2 dimensions. But even by the time data gets to 4-dimensional data, 4 dimensions, 4 numbers, human beings find it hard to do. So, reading these numbers, these 4 numbers, and telling you how ill the baby is actually requires considerable expertise. And of course, it has to be done, we wanted to do this on every baby. Babies are born 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day. So we've got a difficult task that we want to automate all round the year So the answer was, we need to build an expert system, a computerised expert system. So I, as a PhD student, was given the task of build an expert system. So I built it. So here it is. Here's the expert system. So I went to my supervisor, I'd finished, I'd built my system, and I said, here's my system, I've finished my PhD. And my supervisor says, well, does it work? And I said, well, yeah, you put 4 numbers in, and you put the four blood gas numbers in, and the system tells you how sick is the baby. He said, well, but how do you know it's right? How do you know the answer it's giving is correct? So I said, well, I don't know, how do we know the number? How do we know whether the number is correct? Remember earlier I said this is the first one in the world, so I've built the first expert system in the world in this area. So how do I test whether my system is working well enough to use? Well, so I've got no database of correct answers, I've got no gold standard, no correct answer. So what's the answer? I've told you the answer already. What's the answer to how I test whether my system is good enough to use? I compare it against experts in a form of Turing test. This isn't the full Turing test. I'm not claiming I'm creating artificial intelligence here. I'm just saying we've got a form of expert system acceptance test. And my expert system assessment test is my system giving the same answers as my experts? So, I was working in a world-leading research group of world-leading experts in this acid-base, this umbilical cord blood analysis. And so what I did, I picked 50 babies. These were 50 sick babies. I say 50 sick babies because if I just pick 50 at random, out of 1,000 babies, 950 out of 1,000 will be healthy. So if I just pick at random, almost all the babies will be healthy. So I took the 50 out of 1,000 which weren't healthy, shall we say. Well, actually I had a database of 10,000 babies by this point, because I've been collecting them as I went through my PhD. So I had a database of 10,000 babies and I picked 50 of the sick ones. And I gave them to the experts. So I gave the results to the experts. You know these 4 numbers for each baby? We've got the 4 numbers for each baby, and I said to the experts, from these numbers, looking at the asphyxiated state of the baby, can you place them in order of which baby is the sickest to which baby is the healthiest? There's no scale, there was no arbitrary scale on this, so I asked them to just put them in order. So you label it as 1 means that's the sickest baby, and 50 as the number 50 meant that was the healthiest baby. And I gave the same task to my fuzzy system, and I was going to compare my fuzzy system then to my experts, thinking I'll get the same answer as my experts. Now this is the sort of data I would be getting. The baby, these are sort of identification numbers for the baby, and this baby here, all of the experts labelled it as baby number 1. It's the sickest baby. And my fuzzy system, my fuzzy system, don't worry about the fuzzy system at the moment. My expert system labelled it as 1 as well. I'm going to just transfer that data now into this graph. And I'll just explain now what this graph is. On the x-axis here, this is the number that the expert system gave it. So this baby number 1 appears at position 1 on the x-axis here. And then on the y-axis, I've plotted a dot at each position that my 6 experts put that baby. So actually this dot here, you can't see it, but there's 6 dots on top of each other. Because baby number 1, at position 1 on that graph, yeah, all 6 experts also said it was number 1. So there's 6 dots there. This is baby number 2, what my system said was a second 6 baby. There's actually 4 dots on top of each other there at baby number 2. And then there's one's baby number 4 and one's baby, expert said baby number 8. Actually, the experts have said different things for baby number 2. By the time you get to, let's say for example there, that's baby, what my system has said baby number 12. One expert said 9, one said 10, one said 11, 13, 14, 15, 16. All 6 experts have given a different number than my expert system. And they're given different numbers from each other. If you give human beings a difficult decision-making task, they will say different things. They may give slightly different answers. Even when they're experts, if the task is difficult, but even experts may give you different answers. You can say they may get it wrong, but there isn't always a right or wrong answer. But give people a difficult task and they'll give you different answers. We call that inter-expert variation. Everyone's quite happy with that because, you know, there's what, almost 50 people in the room now. If we give you a difficult task and I set you all on to do it, you come up with different answers. So, yeah. Okay, but I started getting interested in this. And remember, this is part of my Turing test, you know, my test for acceptance of expert system. Just, this is just an aside. If it was perfect, it would be a straight line through the origin. That's what perfect agreement would be. All the dots would be perfectly on top of each other like that number 1. But they're not. They start spreading out. You get variation between the experts. Actually, we can calculate something called the Spearman rank order correlation. The Spearman rank order correlation for a straight line would be 1. The Spearman rank order correlation for this data is 0.95. So actually that's very good agreement. It's not perfect agreement, but it's very good agreement. But somehow there's some pattern of variability. Perhaps at the extremes there's less variability, perhaps in the middle there's some more variability. Anyway, I started getting interested in this, and I did a second experiment. What I did, I got 2 of my experts, only 2 of the experts, expert A and expert B. I got them to volunteer to do the task again 1 month after they'd done it already. Just as an aside, all 6 experts had done it under exam conditions independently. You know, they weren't allowed to talk to each other, they weren't allowed to take away the results. They went into the exam, they had the results, they did the test, then they left. They weren't allowed to take any material away from them. So a month later, I got 2 of them, I said, do the exam again. Only 2 out of 6 agreed to do it. And under the same exam conditions, same test, the babies were presented in random order, randomised the order, so they couldn't remember the order of them. So look, again, so now I've done the same sort of graph with A and B. So what we've got, for example, on baby number 1, actually there's 2 circles on top of each other, B and B 1 month later, and there's 2 triangles on top of each other, A and 1 month later. Again, they both agreed, both times, that baby number 1 was the sickest baby, and as agreed with the expert system. And in fact, baby number 1 actually died. It's the only baby out of these 50 babies that died. So it seems actually very clear that baby 1 was the sickest baby. So we can say that they've got the answer correct on this baby, because we know that one was the sickest. Baby number 2, one expert said second worst both times, one expert said third worst. This is the first interesting one. Baby number 3, expert B said it was, well, 6th worst both times, but expert A said 5th worst the first time they did the test, and then they said 9th worst the second time they did the test. Expert A, for that one, gave different answer that they had given before. Actually, as you go through, there's plenty of places where you can find the circles separated vertically and triangles separated vertically. So vertical separation means the expert is giving different answers. So So vertical separation of the triangles means the expert is giving a different answer to themselves. Sometimes you can see that those dots are really quite wide apart. That's quite a big difference, that expert. That one, those two circles there, they're far apart. If you give humans a difficult decision problem, not only is there differences between people, but I disagree with myself. An expert is not a perfect decision maker. We could say they make mistakes. I don't know, again, we were just talking earlier. Slight difference between mistakes and slight difference in opinion. Yeah. Yeah, the doctors only saw the blood gas results on this one. Yeah. So sorry, do we just call that intra-expert variation?
But in reality, does doctors see the baby too?
Well, they do, but then there's other, maybe we can discuss this, because there's other reasons why the baby might be ill, not just oxygen starvation. So the oxygen, what we're trying to do here is find out how asphyxiated the baby is. So if I tested my fuzzy system against it, my expert system against itself, of course it would give a straight line, whereas my experts are giving something like this. So if I'm trying to test whether my system is indistinguishable from my experts, my expert systems have variation, and my expert system doesn't. So that's good, right, isn't it? So humans make mistakes, but computers don't. We shouldn't have computers making mistakes, they should just be correct. These are just some random quotes, it doesn't matter. Everyone just assumed that computers should always give 100% reliability. However, I'm just going to use a loose analogy. If you played chess or Go, and you played that in exactly the same way, if you tried to create the optimal strategy and played it optimally every time, you would quickly lose. You can't play chess or Go the same way each time. You have to vary the process to play chess effectively. So I'm going to say this computer expert system will only ever pass this Turing test if it's equally unreliable or variable as the experts is simulating. Again, we had this discussion earlier. I think we're going to have to, it's important to distinguish the word variable from just making random mistakes. We can't accept random behaviour, completely random behaviour, but actually have some variability. So I got interested in these research questions. Could we measure and model this variability, inter and intra-expert variability? And if we modelled it, could we use that to actually improve decision making? So I'm going to quickly talk about fuzzy sets now. This is trying a 2-second prime on fuzzy sets. Does everyone know what fuzzy is? Most people. So a crisp set, you don't often see it drawn like this. On the x-axis I've got elements which belong to the set, the universal set. So I'm considering now the set of integers, the set of whole numbers, a set of natural numbers. On the y-axis I've got an indicator variable. I'm plotting 0 if it's not in the set, and I'm plotting it at 1 if it is in the set. So the set of prime numbers I can draw like this. 2 is in the set of prime numbers, 3 is, 5, 7 are. Well, 1, mathematicians argue about 1, so anyway, I'll put it not in the set of prime numbers. 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, they're all not prime. So that's how you draw a set of prime numbers. Oops. This is an ordinary set where all I've done now is I'll put the x-axis as a continuous number. So these are now, let's consider the set of real numbers. And I'm considering the real numbers between 0 and 100, and I'm drawing the set of real numbers less than 20. So I can draw that as a set which is 1 if it's less than 20, then there's a step function and it drops to 0 at 0.20, and it's 0 above 20. So that's the crisp set of numbers of reals less than 20. So in 1965, Lockvizada started considering real-world sets. So what about the set of young people? So who's in the set of young people? I can see some people at the back who are in the set of young people, I would say. Am I in the set of young people? No, someone being nice and saying yes. Lockvizada said, well, but no, how do we define the set of young people? We use the term all the time. We talk about young people, we talk about old people. So surely there's a set of old people if we talk about old people. So this is a set of young people. So this is sort of happening. If the set of young people, if this x-axis is now the age in years, so the way I've drawn it here is if you're less than 20, you're in the set of young people, and then suddenly at age 20, you're not young anymore. You're not in the set of young people. And in 1965, Zade said this isn't any good for the real world, so he created something called the fuzzy set. And he basically, from that previous diagram, he basically just did two key things. This y-axis can now be any number between 0 and 1. And then I can have a slope on my function. So what this is now saying is if we are young, the way I've drawn it here, if we're between 0 and 5 years, we're definitely in the set of young people. Once we're 45, we're not in the set of young people anymore, so I'm not in the set of young people. And somewhere between the age of 5 and the age of 45, gradually we get less and less in the set of young people. So the way I've drawn it here, at age 25, someone's half young. They're half in the set of young people. And then you can have different fuzzy sets. So you can be young, middle-aged, old. And here's an example of drawing some fuzzy sets. And the way I've drawn it now is so that if you're 25, you're half young and you're half middle-aged. I often joke, you can tell I drew these slides a long time ago, because now I would probably move those all to the right, you know, because I don't like to think, I don't think many people would say 25 is half middle-aged, but anyway. But at age, point about the fuzzy set is it can be half in one set and half in another. That's basically a fuzzy set. I built my expert system using fuzzy sets. But in one sense, the fuzzy sets aren't fuzzy. What do I mean by that? If I draw a middle-aged thing, fuzzy set here, I look up age 20 and I get the answer. The way I've drawn this one, 0.2. So every time I look up the answer 20, I always get exactly 0.2 out. So in one sense, there's no fuzziness in that system, in that fuzzy set. Oops. So I'm interested to model this variation. So what I did was created a fuzzy set where the fuzzy set moved around. The fuzzy set moves from side to side. Because it moves from side to side, you can now, each time you take a reading at age 20, you might get a different answer out. And the different answer you get depends on how much you wobble that fuzzy set from side to side. If you only give it a very small wobble, you get almost the same answer. If you give it a big wobble, you get a different answer. A quite different answer. The standard fuzzy system, you take some inputs, you run it through the fuzzy system. I'm not going to talk about that at all. You get some output. The point is, because ordinary fuzzy sets are, as I showed you, have no variation. If you put in the same x, you always get the same y out of it. So a standard fuzzy system has this no variation. In contrast, this system with variation, each time you run it, the fuzzy set wobbles from side to side. So if you run it n times, each time you run it, it runs like a standard fuzzy set system. But the second time you run it, the sets have moved a tiny bit, and you might get a different answer out. So then you can run it n times and get n different answers. And then what you do, you can run it n times. N could be 3 times, it could be 50 times, it could be 10,000 times or more. So what you then get out is a set of different answers. And then you can perform what I call some sort of aggregation operator. Aggregation operator could be something like take the average of all the answers I got. Could we take the minimum, could we take the maximum, could we take the mode, the most common answer, whatever. It's some different aggregation operator. And you come out with some overall ensemble, some overall decision. And again, it's important, I think, to recognise that what I'm arguing for here is some small variations in our system, not random behaviour, not completely random. We only allow these fuzzy sets to move by small amounts. So I did some experiments on variation. That's just probably, for time, I'm just going to skip over those. When we run our system, we ran our system with different amounts of variation, small amounts of wobble, and looked at how my fuzzy expert system varied its behaviour. And you can see sort of patterns of variation which start looking like the graphs I showed you earlier. And I did some experiments on looking at the sort of pattern of variation and how well it matched expert variation. And we did one experiment to measure the inter-expert variation, and another set of experiments to measure that intra-expert variation. Look, on both of these, and these sort of error bars here, give us the maximum and minimum of the fuzzy decision. And on both graphs, look, you see baby number 1, the error bars are sort of picked on number 1. That decision is certain. The error bars actually don't move. Oops. However, 3% wobble gave us a best match with the experts. So if I take my fuzzy system and I wobble it by 3%, 3% means 3% of that x-axis. So on that age variable from 0 to 100, it means varying the centre of the set by 3, left and right. Then I get the best match with the experts. And I think the interesting thing here is I get the best match of both inter and intra-expert agreement. I think this is an interesting observation. Let me just consider this for a second. If I show 3% variation and Professor Wang has 3% variation, if we then measure the difference between me and Professor Wang, if that's also 3%, I'm going to argue that shows we're actually making basically the same decision with only 3% variation. Because if we were giving a different decision, Professor Wang would have 3% variation, I would have 3% variation, and the variation between the two of us would have to be more than 3%. I'm going to argue that. I can't prove that. But, so I think this is an interesting observation. So although there's 3% variation, fundamentally the experts are saying the same thing. That was sort of answered the question as to whether we could model the variation and quantify the variation. I mean, look, what it's done is it's in some sense quantified it. Whether that's the correct quantification, I can't tell you, but it's quantified it somehow. I'm just going to quickly show these slides to move on in time. The second question I wanted to know was, could this ever improve, could any of this improve decision making? Not only so I've modelled the variation, but is there any point in modelling the variation? So I've now switched medical topic. And the reason I've switched medical topic is actually this is about more than 10 years later. You know, the work I'm presenting here is like 20 years work. So 10 years later, I was in Nottingham, and in Nottingham they've got a world-leading breast cancer team. And the problem is, post-operative treatment. The medical term is adjuvant therapy. In any medical field, there's two primary things: diagnosing a disease, have you got cancer, and then prognosis, which is how do you treat the disease, and what's going to happen to someone, is are they going to live or die. The thing we were working with here is, this is treatment of people who have got breast cancer. We're not trying to say yes or no whether they've got breast cancer. So this is a group of women, all of whom had breast cancer. If a woman has breast cancer, the first thing you do without any further decision is have surgery and you remove the tumour. And then you have to make a decision about extra treatment, which could include things like radiotherapy or chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is a very nasty treatment. It makes people's hair fall out, it makes it very ill, so you want to give as minimum chemotherapy as possible. So we're just focusing on whether to give them chemotherapy or not. And this is what's called a clinical protocol, which is from Nottingham. It's a box of rules. This is actually a rule base, which the doctors use to decide. There's some indicator variables. I'm not going to go through them. This bottom box is the most significant form of cancer, the worst form of breast cancer. And you've got this decision variable here, recommending chemotherapy. So we say, yes, you should have chemotherapy if the woman's age is less than 40. And we say, no, don't have chemotherapy, age greater than 60. I point this out because this is real rules for Nottingham. And I think it's interesting we have age less than 40, which is like a crisp decision boundary. So if a woman is 39, they say, yes, have chemotherapy. And what does this rule actually mean? Do we all think it really means on the 40th birthday? They say, oh, no, don't have chemotherapy anymore. Probably not. There's also a gap between 40 and 60, which is unspecified. So what happens in the range between 40 and 60, I don't know. I mean, that rule says age greater than 60. What does that mean? On your 60th birthday, are you greater than 60 on your 60th birthday? One day after your 60th birthday? When you're 61 years old? So unspecified. But I turned that clinical protocol into a set of fuzzy rules, and this fuzzy rule here, where we've got the age is young, that's a fuzzy rule exactly like those fuzzy sets I was talking about earlier, where we have a young fuzzy set, and we look up that age is young on the young fuzzy set. I'm just going to skip straight to this one, and say, so what I did, or the team did, we built a fuzzy system, and we optimised it to create the best fuzzy system we could. And this is where you'll have to believe me, we spent months optimising the system, and we ended up the type 1 fuzzy system. And the optimised fuzzy system, we were trying to get the maximum number of agreements with what happened in clinical practice. So the y-axis is how many times does the expert system say, do what actually ended up happening. Again, that might not necessarily be the correct answer. Difficult question. But anyway, the best type 1 fuzzy system we could get 1,180 agreements. And then what we've got on the x-axis here is my fuzzy system with variation. So if I've got 0.03, that's 3% variation. 0.08 is 8% variation. And basically, and what we did, I ran it 30 times. The fuzzy system said yes, no, or maybe to giving chemotherapy. So what I did was run it 30 times, got 30 different yes, no, or maybe answers, and then I took a majority vote. So if more of the expert system said yes than said no, the answer is yes. So this is like asking 30 people, is it going to rain tomorrow, yes or no? Instead of asking one person and saying I'll take their decision, I ask everyone in the room and I just take your overall decision. And you can see like that, you can imagine that's going to get a better decision. Asking a group of people is going to get a better decision than asking any one person. And so basically, with 8% variation, we increase the decision making to get 1,141. So I'm loosely going to say running the expert system, adding in variation to my expert system, running it multiple times and asking for multiple answers, and then using that to give a majority vote gives a better decision. So say, asking 30 people will it make tomorrow, you get a better answer than asking any one person. So having variation and running more than one system improves decision making. So I'm just going to try and quickly finish off with an eye on time here. I'm just going to say for learning, what is learning? If Pavlov's dog's learning, there's different forms of learning, transfer learning, reinforcement learning, all sorts of things. So I don't want to get bogged down in learning too much, but I'm going to make the assertion that if you never vary your behaviour, you can't learn. Learning somehow is defined as doing something different than what you used to do. If you always do something the same, then you're not learning. You know, if you're learning to ride the bike, when you start off, you fall off all the time. If you never learn, you would keep falling off. So for learning to take place, your behaviour has to change. Somehow, in reinforcement learning, you try different things, and some of the things which work, you carry on doing more than the things that don't work. You know, it's basic reinforcement learning. So I'm going to advocate that for learning to take place, there must be variation in the system. And I'm going to suggest that these sort of fuzzy sets that I've got could incorporate this. So if I just vary around the midpoint, that's variation, and no learning takes place, that's just variation. If I vary the system, and then somehow, because of the variation, I end up moving the system, the fuzzy set to a different place, then my system has learnt, because it's changed the meaning of what middle age did. If middle age moves from there to the red line, the pink to the red, then its definition of middle age has changed. So learning means permanent shifts in these fuzzy sets. But to have permanent shifts in the fuzzy sets, I must have variation in the fuzzy sets. So I must have variation in order to have learning. And then finally, I'm going to end up with something philosophical. Maybe this is a bit too philosophical for the moment, but because this is called the Alfred North Whitehead, and Whitehead was a philosopher, I want to end up with something philosophical. So I don't know if you've heard the Chinese room argument. This was someone called John Searle in 1980. So I think it's not called Chinese room for any other reason other than John Searle was British. And he picked a language which was, let's say, foreign, deliberately foreign in the sense that it was difficult, not the same characters even. For us British people, looking at the Chinese language, I can't even guess the words, you know. So the point was, we've got a program which passes, So suppose I create a program which translates English to Chinese. So I've created a computer program which converts English to Chinese perfectly. John Searle said, imagine then it's a computer program, so you could write it down. So if I can write it down, a human being can operate that program. Just follows the algorithm and does exactly what the computer would do. Right? And the whole reason here is it just makes this clearer, the fact that you've got a human being doing it. The human being sits in a room, takes in input from one side of the room, they run the computer algorithm to translate English into Chinese, and they pass the result out of the room. Okay? To the outside observer, the program takes English and translates it into Chinese. But it's absolutely clear, isn't it, that the person operating those algorithms doesn't understand, that person doesn't understand Chinese. They're just operating the computer program. So the point is, this person is mimicking the CPU, it's mimicking the computer. The computer is just running the algorithm. So just because the computer runs the algorithm, and the algorithm translates English to Chinese. It doesn't mean the computer understands Chinese. So what John Searle was saying was, even if a computer passes the Turing test, it doesn't necessarily mean it understands the Turing test, it just passes the Turing test. So being able to pass the Turing test doesn't in any way mean the computer's got intelligence. I'm just going to put something, this is just I'm just going to end with this is some fun thoughts from my perspective. I think this is interesting. We talk about about creating artificially intelligent robots and creating self-conscious robots. I'm just going to give a little experiment, thought experiment. Supposing you're an AI researcher, and you're a very good AI researcher, and you're trying to build a self-conscious working robot, and you've got it to perform a adult chimpanzee. And adult chimpanzees can walk, communicate, learn, they can show emotion, they can carry out basic planning, they have social awareness, they're pretty good functioning things with a lot of attributes which we say are intelligent. And you want to extend its brain and create intelligence and create true self-consciousness, to move from a chimpanzee level of intelligence to a human intelligence. So supposing that you've got an idea of how to do it. So you write your add intelligence function, and you put that into your machine and you switch it on. So you extend your brain program, you increase your ideas, and you switch it on. You actually wait 1 year. You start trying it and it doesn't do anything, and then a year later, after you switch it on and waited a year, still, all it does is walk not very well. It doesn't talk yet. It doesn't really show any evidence of self-consciousness or real intelligence. If you think about it, a human being at 1 year old, 1 year from birth, 1 year from start, 1 year from switch on, well, it's more than 1 year from switch on, still isn't showing any intelligence. So I'm just suggesting the idea that we'll create an intelligent machine and then switch it on, and suddenly it'll be, oh, look, now it's intelligent. Why would we expect something to be instantly intelligent? And finally then, how would we know? Suppose you continue your experiments and you end up with a robot that looks human and acts human. Is it really intelligent? Is it self-conscious? You know the famous philosopher Descartes, I think, therefore I am. I know I'm self-conscious, I know I'm thinking. With the greatest respect, I don't know that Professor Wang is self-conscious or thinking. I assume you are, because you look human. I assume all people in the world are self-conscious because you look human and you act human. So we think all humans are self-conscious and thinking like we're thinking, and are self-conscious like we're self-conscious. But supposing we program something which doesn't even look human, and it passes the Turing test. Let's say, 10 years the World Wide Web's been going, let's say. Let's say in another 50 years the World Wide Web is improved. If I want to find a correct answer, I don't ask a student, I don't ask anyone in the room, I type it into Google and Wikipedia and they give that's how to find the correct answer. So already the intelligence of the internet is large. Supposing in 20 years we've got the World Wide Web which passes the Turing test, i.e. we can type anything into the web and it comes out with intelligent answers. Is that intelligent? Are you going to think that's thinking, is self-conscious? It's thinking, I'm the World Wide Web, I want to do this, I want to do that. Should we treat it like a human being then? And then my last thought, how do we ever know it was self-conscious? But even more, how do we know it's not self-conscious? How do we know it's not self-conscious already? How do we know the internet already isn't intelligent enough to be sitting there thinking, I'm going to take over the world now? You can't detect self-consciousness in other things. So I'm just going to say, it could be that we've already built an intelligent, self-conscious machine which just happens to not look anything like us. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, now is our turn. 今天我觉得讲的比上次听过的是，但是这从决策的角度讲，我觉得这是我听过的最好的报告之一。其实大家可能或者用基础给了一个方法来测试，就是咱们专家之间的这个决策的确定性。因为专家自己它是随着时间变化，但是随着场景它还不一样。怎么测，怎么来这个讨论这个问题？我觉得今天讲的这个。But I want to answer your question in the end, the internet, because I had a similar discussion. I forgot a few years ago with another group because the Chinese room problem.
Yeah.
See, this human use dictionary to help, so and other people will think that no Chinese, but actually she's not. And this internet thing, right, is reversed. Because the internet can hide now Google, Wiki, but then if the question becomes difficult, right, I can have a bunch of people behind.
Yes.
Just like now, I was surprised because so many AI companies now actually doing this.
Yeah.
Pretend they are doing AI, but they are actually human behind. But then now we have difficulty to tell if this company is doing the real AI, artificial AI, or human AI, right?
Yeah.
So now we already face this problem. But my question, my answer to those questions is I always ask people, do you think the square root of -1 is a number? 就是 I 虚数 is 虚数 is a number? If you think it's number, then the machine have the consciousness, because this is artificial consciousness or imaginary consciousness. And 400 years ago, no one, if you do that, you're stupid, right? And remember 1,000 years ago when this Arabian mathematician did that, and he corrected himself. They said, "Oh, sorry, I made a mistake." And then for 600 years, we don't have I.
Yeah.
So even in the beginning, if other big mathematicians didn't accept this number, right, then we never accept the I as a number.
Yeah.
And today, if you don't think I is a number, right, you are stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so I think maybe in the future, what is the consciousness, and we have a I problem. And that's I remember this discussion I had. I'm so glad you brought this up.
Yeah.
这样，我回答了他最后这个问题，就是关于因为这个人到底有没有这个 consciousness 中文怎么说？意识思维。你说机器有没有？我就说这个负一开平方跟这个 I 虚数是不是个数？400年前它不是个数，400年前谁干这个东西，那谁就是神经病。那么英文这个叫虚数，其实这 imaginary number 就是神经病的意思，这个不是数。但是现在我说你要再不认为它不是数，你就是神经病。你再回小学中学时，小学生能知道。你看这个时代变化，今天我们前面是 so everything changed with the time, with the technology, right? So with our actually is convention. If you don't want relativity, if you don't want quantum mechanics, so if you don't want microchip, you don't need that. You don't need I. But if you want the computer we have, if you want to have, you want the 什么引力波啊这种相对论量子力学，那你一定要接受虚数是个数，否则的话这推不出来，就这么简单。将来你要 if you want to go to the smart society, the age of intelligence, right? I think you have to accept this machine have artificial or imaginary consciousness. That's my opinion.
Different form of consciousness.
So now is 就像我们今天上午刚才在那个专家讨论的时候，我们觉得这个可以写个什么文章呢？第一个就是引言了，第二个就讲人工专家系统怎么80年代、90年代那么高的期望，最后一下子没了。但是现在好多这种智能的问题，第三阶现在好多的智能的问题，无人车驾驶，这个包括医疗的这个东西。你再不接触这种那个东西，不给他一个试验，就刚才他说的，你要给他试，要给那个时间，你不能小孩说给他1年之后还走路这么慢，还这么笨，你一脚把他踢掉了，那永远长不大。所以说，这就是黑格尔说的，这个人类从这个历史里面学的唯一的教训就是永远不接受过去。这个，所以这就按照这个说法，人工专家系统为什么最后完蛋，就是大家的期望太高了，不允许他犯错。这个当然要犯什么错？那么第三个就是变化 variation， 人你看专家之间有 variation， 就是之间他自己还有 variation， 对吧？这 variation 有，那么通过学习方法、加强学习、深度学习、对抗学习，现在都有，大家都在做。但是如果我们还继续以前的这种这叫 excessive 这个 imperfection， 就是这个完美的这个标准要求的，这个他还是达不到。对吧？然后他有个，最后你就是这个，就相当于，其实他刚才讲的这个，就是年轻、中年、这个老年。我是看了这个，随着我年龄增大，我这个东西也变化了。以前觉得这个年轻就是17、18岁、20几岁都觉得，我17、18岁是觉得20几岁的人都蛮老，我挺没什么问题。现在我觉得这个什么，这个60几岁还可以年龄大。这个所以不一样，随着 age 不一样，但是随着时间还不一样。所以 actually we should do a test. We should do a study today, right? Maybe we have people. You give me the young age, middle age, old age. So we sell it.
Yeah.
Or we publish somewhere, and then 10 years later, let's do another one. Like this.
I think China would be a very good test.
And then we can do a test on different region.
Yeah.
If you want, we can do that. Like Ningbo province, Ningbo, Beijing, Shanghai. I think this go with the wealth and many factor.
I think I just came from Shenzhen, and someone in Shenzhen said the average age of the population of Shenzhen at the moment is 33. That's the average age. So I think the position of those sets will depend on.
Well, I think that's a good study. I'm sure if many labor work.
Yeah. Can I just? If people have got questions, I'm just going to. There's a couple other just points. Are just observations. I want to go.